Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Duncan Wood. I'm the director of the Mexico Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. It's an honor to be here with our very distinguished panelists today to talk about an issue which is very close to our hearts, an issue which we have thought and talked about for a long time, and in particular, Eric and I have had long conversations about when we should do an event on this issue and how we should do an event on this issue. And consequently, I have to say that we bear some of the blame for not doing this earlier because we kept procrastinating. And then, of course, the events of recent events have made us realize that now is as good a time as any. It would have been better if we'd done this before, but we didn't. And I apologize to everybody for that lapse. But we are committed to raising awareness of this issue. We're created to dialogue on this very, very important issue, not just in Mexico, but obviously around the world. One of the standard response that we hear from authorities when we talk about violence against journalists and threats against journalists is that violence is bad in general, that violence is an unpleasant and really, hopefully, avoidable feature of society. But unfortunately, I find that that's an inadequate response. I've heard it many times that, that the murder of any citizen is something that we want to eliminate. But the fact is that we all know violence against journalists has broader societal and democratic implications. We're talking, of course, about freedom of expression. And we live in a time where attacks on the free media, not just in Mexico, as I said, around the world, and even, of course, here in the United States of America, have become more and more common. We were saddened and outraged by the events that have brought this event to pass. The Mexico Institute, under the excellent leadership of Eric Olson, has focused on security issues for well over a decade now in Mexico. And we have to accept that even though institutions such as our own and, of course, WOLA, and we're delighted, Maureen, thank you very much for partnering with us on this and for all your leadership on this issue as well, we're still so far from bringing about acceptable levels of citizen security, journalist security in Mexico. Let me just say that we invited the government of Mexico to participate in this event today. We believe very much in open dialogue and open forums. They declined to participate at this particular point, but I'd like to emphasize that, of course, the opportunity is there for them to participate at a later date. Dialogue is fundamental to the work that we do, and hopefully we will have that opportunity to engage with the Mexican government at some point in an open forum. The issue, of course, is not just about journalists here. The excellent story from the New York Times just over a week ago about cyber attacks on activists in Mexico has raised awareness of another dimension of this attack on freedom of expression. And again, that's something that we feel very, very strongly about. At least 2 members of our Mexico Institute board were targets of recent attacks via their cell phones. Let me say once again, thank you to Eric and to Maureen, to WOLA for partnering with us. Thank you to our panelists for being here. I feel terrible that I'm not going to be able to stay here. Unfortunately, I have to go and do management training, compulsory management training. However, yes, I know that you can feel the pain, can't you? But luckily, we are webcasting, and we will have a recorded version of this event on our website, so I will be able to see it later on. Eric, thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Duncan. I really appreciate the fact that the Mexico Institute and you in particular, you personally have really expressed an interest and a desire to cover this, what is potentially a very sensitive and difficult topic in bilateral relations and with Mexico. And so I thank you for your willingness to to put this on the agenda of the Mexico Institute. And a special word of thanks to my colleague and good friend Maureen Myers and the Washington Office on Latin America. They have truly been partners in this process. She will have a direct role here in a bit, but I just want to acknowledge again that we really appreciate the partnership with the Washington Office on Latin America. And then a word of welcome to all the journalists who join us today, journalists in the audience, journalists online, and of course the panelists that are with us and the experts on the issue of freedom of expression. And we will introduce them. Maureen will introduce our folks, our friends from Mexico who are joining us. But I just wanted to start out by giving a special recognition and shout out to the los tres que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Adela Navarro from Zeta Magazine in Tijuana. Ismael Bojorquez, the co-founder of RíoDoce. Bienvenido, Ismael. And of course, Norma Trujillo from Jalapa, Veracruz. These are the champions that are on the front lines on these issues. They face this on a daily basis. Así que estamos muy agradecidos por su presencia el día de hoy. And that reminds me, I didn't make the announcement, but this will be a bilingual event. If you need translation, there's English translation, there's Spanish translation, and there's Spanglish translation as well. So whatever you need. If you don't have a listening device, please raise your hand. Gina will help make sure that you have the right things. So as we've said already, we're here today to talk about a painful subject, frankly, and a difficult one, freedom of the press and violence against journalists in Mexico. We know this is a problem not just in Mexico. I work a lot on Central America, and it's an issue there. And frankly, the press situation of the press in this country is not always the easiest as well, although facing less in terms of direct physical threats and violence. Freedom of the press, freedom of expression has long been a challenge in Mexico. While today we can celebrate more independent and professional investigative journalism than ever, and a much stronger civil society, the context nevertheless remains deeply troubling. Government advertising, government-funded journalism, entre comillas, are still a major problem across Mexico, and the seeming inability of state and federal prosecutors to bring an end to these practices that are clearly in violation of the law is disturbing, to say the least. And while violence against journalism has always been an issue, you remember the case of Manuel Buendia, the journalist and columnist with Excelsior who was assassinated in 1984. This has been something that's been with us for a long time. Nevertheless, it's become particularly acute in recent years with the rise of violent criminal organizations that have either dictated coverage or forced self-censorship and even brought about the demise of valuable media outlets. And the impunity that follows those threats is also deeply disturbing. Listen to what Freedom House's 2016 Freedom of the Press report says. This is a report, the most recent report. Press freedom in Mexico remained under extreme pressure due to violent attacks on journalists by criminal gangs and a pattern of impunity for the perpetrators. Federal agencies tasked with protecting threatened journalists and investigating crimes against the media failed to function effectively, partly due to a lack of resources. Interesting, this is my comment, interesting enough, they added another sentence, and it's poignant given the current context. Freedom of expression advocates also expressed concern about new regulations that authorize expansive government surveillance powers under the 2014 telecommunications law. So this is over a year ago already discussing this. The record is extremely troubling. 7 journalists killed so far in 2017. The latest report of the appearance of Salvador Adame Pardo's body, the director of a local TV station in Michoacan, This just emerged this week, right? He had disappeared over a month ago, but his body was recently found, is another case in point, and that's 7 so far this year, 11 in 2016. And of course, part of what really got us motivated at this time was the assassination of Javier Valdéz, the co-founder of RíoDoce, who bravely and tirelessly reported on organized crime and government complicity in the deeply troubled state of Sinaloa. Javier was gunned down in broad daylight in Culiacan on May 15th. We were honored to host Javier here at the Wilson Center in 2011 after he received the CPJ award, and he was also a recipient of the Maria Moore Cabot Award. So he was a well-recognized expert and journalist. And his demise, obviously, deeply troubling and tragic. So despite the sensitivities, we believe it's important to face the challenges honestly and discuss how to address these. We are enormously grateful to our lineup of experts and journalists accompanying us today. Some have traveled from Mexico in long distances, so we're grateful for their coming and joining us. They will help us understand the complex nature of the threats to freedom of expression and freedom of the press in Mexico. I am going to introduce our first panel, who will give us some broad overview and thoughts about this issue. And then we'll take a brief break and then hear directly from the journalist from on the ground, on the front lines in Mexico. We're going to hear first from Ana Cristina Ruelas, who is the director of Article 19's Office for Mexico and Central America, Prior to her position as director, Ms. Ruelas was the officer of the Right to Information program, where she dedicated her time to research and analysis on the right to information in Mexico, transparency, and government accountability. And Article 19, if you don't know them, is probably one of the leading organizations on the right of journalists and have really covered this issue very well, and they've been a resource to all of us who think about these issues. So we're glad Ana can join us. Next, we'll hear from Azam Ahmed, who is the New York Times bureau chief for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. In Mexico, Mr. Ahmed's work has focused on impunity and corruption, including stories on the lethality of the military, illegal spying on the nation's most prominent activists, including journalists, and the deadly work of being a journalist in Mexico. And Azam has been in Mexico 2 years now, year and a half? 2 years. And had tremendous impact already in his work, and we're just delighted. He had a trip to Italy planned, and he canceled it to be with us. I guess I exaggerate a little bit, but we are delighted that he is with us today. Thank you, Azam. And then last but not least, Jennifer Clement is the president of PEN International and the first woman to be elected since the organization was founded in 1921. Clement is a leading chronicler of contemporary Mexico. Her work has been translated into 30 languages and has garnered numerous international prizes. She's also focused her work more recently on the issue of violence against journalism in Mexico. So Jennifer, thank you for joining us as well, coming up from Mexico. So without any further ado, we will have our folks speak. You can speak from the podium, you can speak from the desk, donde le parezca mejor, en el idioma que sea, con tal de que no sea italiano. Oh, the webcast isn't working.
For some reason, the website isn't broadcasting it for some reason. So we'll be recording everything, okay?
But we get a sign that says Pegasus. Wouldn't that be something? All right. No fooling. It's not a laughing matter. I'm sorry. Anyway, Ana, por favor, adelante.
I'm going to do it in Spanish. Muchísimas gracias al México Institute del Wilson Center y a WOLA por la invitación. Hoy más que nunca es necesario gritar que en México están matando y espiando a periodistas, que a la sociedad mexicana le falta información y que nos están quitando la oportunidad de escribir una historia diferente. En mi país, quienes ejercen la libertad de expresión tienen que enfrentarse en un terreno que de facto los pone en desventaja con su adversario. La prensa se enfrenta a un enemigo que busca a toda costa ejercer un control efectivo de la información que llega a la sociedad. Quien decide expresarse sabe, de entrada, las reglas del juego. La primera, que en la mayoría de los casos existe un modelo económico de los medios que depende directamente del dinero público y, por lo tanto, en el que el gobierno incide en las líneas editoriales y trunca los alcances de una expresión plural, objetiva e independiente. La segunda regla, que México es el país más peligroso para ejercer el periodismo en América Latina. La tercera, que la violencia contra la prensa tiene garantizada la impunidad. Y la cuarta, que si estás fuera del sistema de información que prevén las tecnologías, eres invisible y por lo tanto tienes que luchar para encontrar información. Así, la sociedad mexicana recibe información a medias y esta se vincula a quien paga o mata por ellas. En este sentido, no podemos hablar de los riesgos a los que se enfrenta la prensa si no reconocemos las distintas violencias que, a través de una política muy bien articulada entre los distintos poderes y niveles de gobierno, se busca limitar y restringir los flujos efectivos de información que llega a la sociedad. Pero ¿por qué México se convirtió en el país más peligroso para ejercer el periodismo? En un contexto de violaciones graves a derechos humanos, las y los periodistas cobran una importancia particular dentro de la disputa de verdades. Por ejemplo, la verdad histórica de Ayotzinapa, de Murillo Karam, fue rápidamente desechada por una sociedad que buscaba respuestas y que recibía diversa información de diferentes fuentes, entre ellas las periodísticas. El reconocimiento de los hechos ocurridos en Tlatlaya, en Apatzingán, o las empresas fantasmas de Javier Duarte no se hubiera dado si no hubiese sido por el trabajo periodístico. La construcción y el contraste de verdades a través del trabajo periodístico ha avivado la exigencia para una verdadera rendición de cuentas. En este escenario, el periodismo y todo aquello que contravierta la verdad oficial se convierte en un elemento incómodo. La mala gestión, la corrupción y la impunidad son notas del diario amanecer de las y los mexicanos, que sin duda impactan en el hartazgo de la sociedad hacia el gobierno y en ese sentido pone en riesgo y en mayor vulnerabilidad a las y los periodistas. Por esto, el incremento de las agresiones contra la prensa no puede verse como un daño colateral al estado de inseguridad vinculado a la guerra contra el narcotráfico, sino como algo verdaderamente intencional. Esto tomando en cuenta que en 2016 documentamos en artículo 19 el asesinato de 11 periodistas y 426 agresiones contra la prensa. En 2017 van 6 periodistas asesinados y 1 desaparecido, a pesar de que el gobierno ha señalado que encontró los restos de Salvador Adame. Esta semana se ha solicitado un peritaje independiente antes de cerrar la investigación porque la familia considera que no existen pruebas suficientes para decir que es Salvador. En total, a la fecha, hay 24 periodistas desaparecidos. Los funcionarios públicos encabezan la lista de los perpetradores. De estas 426 agresiones, el 53% viene de agentes del Estado. De acuerdo a las cifras de la Fiscalía Especializada de Atención a Delitos Cometidos contra la Libertad de Expresión, la impunidad de las agresiones contra la prensa es del 99.75%. A la fecha hay 3 sentencias y esas 3 sentencias no están relacionadas con asesinatos, tampoco apuntan a los autores intelectuales, solamente a los autores materiales. En México no hace falta matar para silenciar. Cada periodista asesinado se ha convertido en un mensaje intimidatorio para aquellos que buscan seguir informando. Los mensajeros se convierten en el mensaje y el mensaje original muere. ¿Alguno de ustedes sabe que estaba investigando Miroslava Breach o Cecilio Pineda? Conocen sus nombres, pero pocos sabemos ya de qué estaban informando. Eso es el efecto de la muerte de un periodista. La violencia física sin duda se ha convertido en la forma más vil, más cínica y más dolorosa de censurar. Sin embargo, en México existen formas cada vez más sofisticadas para controlar los flujos de información y amedrentar a periodistas. Particularmente me refiero al espionaje comprobado contra periodistas y defensores de derechos humanos, que además representa una cuantiosa erogación de recursos públicos sin vigilancia y sin control. ¿Y qué está detrás de la censura, de la precariedad laboral de las y los periodistas y de la falta de corresponsabilidad de los medios de comunicación frente a estos riesgos? La censura se alimenta de un sistema económico del que tanto gobierno como medios de comunicación son cómplices. Una relación perversa en la que la información está supeditada al dinero público que entra y sale de los bolsillos de los medios. Desde hace 7 años hemos advertido sobre montos millonarios ejercidos de manera arbitraria e indiscriminada para promover figuras públicas y generar una forma de censura sutil e indirecta. Enrique Peña Nieto ha erogado alrededor de 34,000 millones de pesos en los 4 años de gobierno que lleva. La publicidad oficial también impacta en las condiciones laborales de las y los periodistas y en la responsabilidad de los medios de comunicación de garantizar medidas de prevención y protección de sus reporteros. En muchos casos, principalmente en los medios locales, el pago en las notas que escriben depende de su publicación, y esto a su vez de que no afecten a aquellos funcionarios públicos que pagan por buena reputación. En el mismo sentido, la publicidad oficial es un vehículo para promover la narrativa del Estado, que mayoritariamente es contraria a la narrativa del movimiento de derechos humanos en el país. Una narrativa que justifica el asesinato de un periodista por estar en un mal momento, en un mal hogar, con malos amigos, como en el caso de la masacre de la colonia Narvarte, donde Rubén Espinosa fue asesinado. ¿Y cuál ha sido la respuesta del Estado? Voy a contar 3 casos para tratar de inducir un poco qué fue lo que pasó. Caso 1. Cecilio Pineda y Pedro Tamayo, asesinados en Guerrero y Veracruz, respectivamente, fueron amenazados. Se integraron al mecanismo de protección, el primero a nivel federal y el segundo a nivel estatal. Y en ambos casos se determinó un riesgo extraordinario, por lo que la medida idónea para protegerlos sería la extracción, el desplazamiento. Cecilio rechazó la medida y Pedro la tomó por un tiempo, pero debido a la falta de condiciones de trabajo, decidió regresar a Veracruz. Ambos fueron asesinados. No existe una investigación respecto a las amenazas que originaron que cada uno se integrara al mecanismo. Caso 2. Salvador Adame. Fue desaparecido en el estado de Michoacán unos días después de la muerte de Javier Valdéz. Salvador había denunciado agresiones por parte de la policía del mando único. A pocos días de su desaparición, el fiscal salió en diversos medios locales y nacionales diciendo que Salvador tenía fotografías comprometedoras con personas de estado civil diverso. No obstante, en ningún momento se mencionó el seguimiento y el protocolo de búsqueda, ni mucho menos las líneas de investigación. Esta semana, antes de informar a su familia y de solicitar muestras de ADN, en conferencia de prensa, la Fiscalía informó que encontró los restos de Salvador, que su asesinato no estaba relacionado con la labor periodística, sino tenía que ver con un pleito personal, de acuerdo a lo dicho por uno de los captores, quien es un integrante del crimen organizado. Caso 3. Tras la publicación del informe Gobierno Espía, el gobierno mexicano ha decidido solamente dirigir la palabra a The New York Times, no a las víctimas ni a la coadyuvancia. Incluso el presidente amenazó con ir en contra de todos aquellos que hubieran acusado falsamente a su gobierno, y la reconsideración a sus palabras la hizo solamente a ese periódico. Asimismo, lejos de considerar las peticiones de las víctimas y sus abogados, la PGR ha dado 2 conferencias de prensa que advierten una serie de acciones que distan mucho de lo que se ha solicitado. Tras la muerte de Javier Valdéz en el estado de Sinaloa, la demanda de justicia y la indignación dio pauta a que por primera vez hubiera un pronunciamiento del presidente. Tuvieron que morir más de 30 periodistas en su sexenio para que el problema se convirtiera en algo en parte de su agenda. Sin embargo, para artículo 19, las palabras del presidente y la conferencia de gobernadores llegaron tarde y tampoco suponen una luz en el camino. Voy a decir brevemente por qué. No habrá un combate decidido a la impunidad mientras el Estado no se investigue a sí mismo. El Estado tiene que reconocer que es el propio Estado quien está agrediendo a la prensa. El sistema de protección a periodistas no va a funcionar si no se considera que el combate a la impunidad es la forma más poderosa de proteger. La violencia contra la prensa se enfrenta a niveles de impunidad superiores a los de los delitos en general, y desgraciadamente los mecanismos de inteligencia del Estado, lejos de funcionar para identificar a los responsables intelectuales de las agresiones, son utilizados para espiar y perseguir periodistas y defensores de derechos humanos. Finalmente, se destaca que el gobierno mexicano ha sido el principal impulsor de una narrativa que criminaliza a la prensa y pone a los periodistas como enemigos del Estado. En este sentido, las organizaciones de derechos humanos en México estamos exigiendo particularmente la transformación de la Procuraduría General de la República a una Fiscalía General verdaderamente autónoma. Esto supone el nombramiento de un nuevo fiscal y la independencia de los servicios periciales. La aceptación del Estado mexicano de la recomendación del Alto Comisionado de las Naciones Unidas respecto a la conformación de un Consejo Asesor contra la Impunidad, conformado por expertos de derechos humanos con un componente internacional. La creación del Comité de Seguimiento Internacional de la Investigación en materia de espionaje. La medida no es generar más leyes y mecanismos de protección. Es importante impulsar un mecanismo de coordinación efectivo que conciba la protección como un sistema integral que involucre actividades bien articuladas entre las distintas instituciones y los distintos niveles de gobierno para efectivamente combatir la impunidad. Si no hay consecuencias, en México se van a seguir matando periodistas. Este no es el punto final de la historia. Vamos a seguir contando agresiones. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ana. We'll now turn to Azam Ahmed.
I'm going to keep my comments pretty short so we can have a longer Q&A. When it comes to killing journalists, I mean, I guess the issue is kind of, to me, the central issue that plagues Mexico on so many different fronts, and it's impunity. You kill a journalist, the chances are you're not going to get caught. You're not going to be prosecuted or pursued. There's probably not even going to be a real investigation. And why is that? As Duncan said earlier, the government often says, well, you know, it's a violent place. In a general context of violence, journalists get killed as well, just like plumbers and doctors. But that's not true. As Anna just said, the statistics against journalists are worse, but what's more is a function of political will, too. These are high-profile murders, and oftentimes you've got a government that isn't, I mean, I had a high government official basically tell me this becomes a political issue. And when it becomes a political issue, there is very little desire for Mexico to be seen as a place where it's a danger to exercise the freedom of expression. But that's exactly what it is. It is extremely dangerous, or in cases not even possible to exercise the freedom of expression, number one, because of the violence, but also, and in some ways more perversely, because of the financing. Most media rely on government funding, which means they don't need to kill you, they just need to call your boss's boss and tell him that story shouldn't run. I started thinking about the story we did on journalist murders last year when the numbers were looking pretty bad. And I realized, like, I'm sure a lot of people in this audience, and certainly all of the panelists, it's almost a normalized thing. Everybody just expects journalists are going to die in Mexico. And it's not surprising. I mean, friends read the article and they said, yeah, I kind of knew all that. That doesn't mean it's not a massive issue. Just because something is as it has been for a long time doesn't mean it's not incumbent on us, especially international media, I think, to make an international issue of it. Mexico isn't China or Turkey. It doesn't have the reputation of a country with an authoritarian regime. And yet, the way it comports itself often looks as much like that as it does a democracy. And that, to me, has been of particular interest. It's, what is Mexico today? What is it going to be? Is there freedom of expression? And if there isn't, then what does that say about its democracy? It's still pretty fragile. And it's not always clear what direction it's heading in. Finally, I think I'll end with, to me, much of this is an issue of the state. A lot of times people will sort of dismiss violence in Mexico as narco-related. But if you look at the threats against journalists, as we're talking about today, more of them come from the state than from narco-traffickers, organized crime. And that statistic is incredible. More journalists are threatened by their own state. Nobody expects narco-traffickers to behave well. They're cartel members. But your own government being more culpable for threatening freedom of expression is pretty exceptional. And then, of course, of the 800 serious cases the government has investigated, and 800 of many times that have actually happened, there's been 2 convictions. Another sort of stunning statistic to me that, again, speaks to this political will and this impunity that I think one you have a lot of and the other you have none of. So I guess, in conclusion, I think this issue, like the espionage issue, what it raises for me is there's this chasm that I'm always trying to measure between what the government says and what the government does. And what they say is often exactly what they should say. They even pass laws. And Duncan and I were talking earlier about the espionage, saying what's the best way to create a law to stop this? Well, there is a law. There was one that exists. There's absolutely no justification for going after the son of a journalist, a 16-year-old, and yet it happened. So I don't think it's a matter of legislation. I don't think it's a matter of getting better laws on the books. It's a matter of applying the laws that exist. It's a matter of creating enough political will and political pressure to force the government to respond. And I guess we'll see. The espionage story has been an interesting one. There's been a lot of reaction in Mexico, but what's it going to amount to? PGR announced, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that they were going to seek help from the FBI. There's a special forensic committee from the UN. Okay, fine. What does that mean? What is that group going to do? Do they have any control or autonomy, the ability to actually investigate? So yeah, I would end with that. I think the issue of the state is the thing that, to me, is of most interest, that they are more culpable in instances against journalists. And at least most suspect behind the espionage against their own sort of nascent civil society. That's
Thank you. Thank you, Azam. So then we'll hear from Jennifer Clement, president of PEN International, and we'll have some time for some questions from the audience.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Duncan, for inviting me, and Wola, too. I just want to say it's an honor to be here with some of the most courageous people, I believe, in the world, Ismael, Adela, Norma, Assam. Their work is so dangerous, and I'm very happy to be here with you. When I was asked to come and speak here today, it made me look back on my deep concern and horror at the killing of journalists in Mexico. In 2009, I became president of PEN Mexico, and for the first time in the organization's history, made the decision not to have a literary program and to center all of PEN Mexico's work to address the killing of journalists. This moment coincided with one of the most extraordinary moments in the tragic story of Mexico's loss of freedom of expression. I am referring to the killing in September 2010 of two young photographers from the Diario de Juárez. They'd only been at the newspaper for a few days when they were executed as they sat in a car. It was this assassination that led the Diario de Juárez to print on the front page of their newspaper a message directed to the cartels. The headline inked across the page said, "Explain to us what you want from us. What are we supposed to publish or not publish so that we know what to abide by? You are at this time the de facto authorities in this city, because the legal authorities have not been able to stop our colleagues from falling." It was a plea, a painful and terrifying call that made news all around the world. Shortly thereafter, PEN Mexico organized a conference on the killing of journalists with PEN America. The event was called Censorship by Bullet. At this event, I spoke about the recent event in Juárez and said, "For Mexicans today, it is hard to interpret the words around us. In these sad and crazy times, we read newspapers where messages from the drug traffickers have been published right beside the real news or in the classified section where narco messages appear in the broken thumb language of text messaging. We read the writing on walls and on the enormous white cotton sheets covered with messages that have appeared hanging from bridges and buildings. In the news coverage, we read letters that were pinned to dead bodies. We also try to decipher words actually carved into the skin of victims as if it were paper. Across a belly, down an arm, we read a skin graffiti. Weeks ago, after the assassination of photojournalist Luis Carlos Santiago, and this is still, I'm referring to that time, some narco graffiti appeared on a wall in Juárez signed by the La Línea cartel that stated, "Nosotros no matamos periodistas." We do not kill journalists. It was a highly unusual declaration. I logged on to the blog del Narco to see the response to this new graffiti. Blog del Narco is an internet site that appeared in early 2010 and still today covers stories that the mainstream media are feeling threatened to stay away from. It's a place where all sides seem to communicate, drug traffickers, law enforcement, and ordinary citizens. This controversial site contains everything from violent videos of torture and decapitations to a section on Mexican narco corridos and even narco jokes. Regarding the graffiti that claimed "Nosotros no matamos periodistas," written on a white wall in red spray paint to look like blood, I found 392 comments. They were not about the message itself or the violence against journalists, but were 392 vitriolic and sarcastic comments about the abominable spelling and poor syntax of this graffiti. One blogger said he was ashamed by the narcos' lack of education, and he continued, "Even our narcos are third world." Another stated that it's not the alphabet that kills, bullets kill. One person wrote emphatically that she preferred to read the messages and graffiti from the rival cartel because at least they knew how to spell. After I read over more than 100 outraged comments, a sheepish and mortified spelling apology was posted, which might have been placed there by the cartel. To this expression of regret, one blogger answered, "You criminals are so good at killing, you've even killed the Spanish language." As the killing of journalists continued with total impunity, it became clear that PEN and other NGOs needed to work to change the law in Mexico. Up until now, the killing of a journalist was a state crime. This meant that very often the criminal was investigating his own crime. We worked hard through public events of protest, as well as letters written to create pressure on the Mexican government. One decisive moment in this was a letter published by PEN in El Universal, signed by the world's major writers, including the Nobel Prize winners, members of the Swedish Academy, and the presidents from most of the world's over 120 PEN centers. For those of you who may not know, PEN International was founded in London in 1921 to promote friendship and intellectual cooperation among writers everywhere, emphasize the role of literature in developing mutual understanding and world culture, fight for freedom of expression, and act as a powerful voice on behalf of writers harassed, imprisoned, and sometimes killed for their views. PEN is the world's oldest and largest human rights organization and the oldest international literary organization. It has more than 100 PEN centers in more than 100 countries. PEN originally stood for poets, essayists, and novelists, but now stands for poets, playwrights, editors, essayists, novelists, and includes writers of any form of literature, including journalists and historians. I'd like to add that in 2009, PEN Mexico also created the PEN Mexico Prizes to honor the valor of Mexican and foreign journalists who were working in Mexico. And it was important to do this to give especially some of the journalists that were working outside of Mexico City prestige and importance, so that killing them might be something you would think twice about. So we gave the prize to Darío Ramírez from Article 19, and to RíoDoce, we gave the prize as well. And so we have two people who have won the PEN Mexico Prize here today. The law that made killing a journalist in Mexico a federal crime was finally approved in 2012, but sadly, at this moment, it is only a symbolic change. Since then, more journalists have been killed, more newspapers have closed down, and there are whole areas of Mexico where we have no idea what is going on. Although killing a journalist is a federal crime, we have yet to see the strength and expertise of the Mexican government act or react. For PEN, this year has addressed two very serious news scenarios. Because of the problems in Mexico, we have often relied on journalists from the United States to tell us some of our own news and from other countries. The extraordinary piece by Ginger Thompson in ProPublica only a week ago with the headline, "How the USA Triggered a Massacre in Mexico," is testimony to this. And I have to give a shout out to Tracy from the Los Angeles Times who's here, who's done extraordinary work on Mexico. Therefore, when Trump was elected to office and began to treat the press with such disdain and aggression, as president of PEN International, I penned a letter that was signed by over 200 of Mexico's most important journalists, writers, academics, NGOs, and editors of publishing houses. The letter said, "To our colleagues in the United States of America, at this time of unprecedented, relentless assault on the free press of the United States by the Trump administration, we journalists, writers, and publishers in Mexico stand in solidarity with you as you do your crucial work. For decades, you have stood by us as successive governments and criminal gangs have targeted our press and assassinated our journalists for doing work in the public interest, uncovering crimes and corruption. And so many times we have only known the truth about our own country by reading the stories followed and uncovered in the US press. We urge you to continue to uphold freedom of expression as your society, institutions, and values depend upon it. You have stood with us during the darkest hours of press freedom in Mexico, and although we could never believe this day would come, we now stand with you." The other event this year has been the June 19th report by Assam and Nicole Perlroth from the New York Times, which uncovered the spying of the Mexican government. In Mexico, everyone is deeply concerned about this. Between impunity for the killing of journalists, no one is in jail for killing a journalist, and this latest news on Mexico's government spying on any opposition, especially from journalists, the panorama is bleak. We have censorship by bullet, and now censorship and self-censorship from spying. This year's events in Chihuahua once again have taken center stage with the assassination of Miroslava Breach, a correspondent for La Jornada newspaper. The mother of three was gunned down, leaving her home in Chihuahua City as she was taking one of her children to school. In an interview with the Dallas News, Luz del Carmen Sosa, a reporter at the Diario de Juárez, who covers crime and security issues, said, "We're suddenly war correspondents." And speaking of war, I have not spoken about guns this morning, which is an important part of the story. At least 2,000 guns cross the border every day into Mexico to fuel this violence. A growing percentage of U.S. firearms sales are destined for Mexico, and the illegal trade in weapons is much greater than anyone has wanted to acknowledge. However, according to a University of San Diego study released in 2013, which found that without demand from Mexico, 47% of U.S. registered gun suppliers would cease to exist. With this in mind, some Mexicans are beginning to think that the wall President Trump wants to build between Mexico and the United States might just be a good thing, after all. I also wonder what might happen if the NRA figures this out. Yes, the killing they're making in Mexico. They might even decide they need to lobby against the construction of the border wall. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We have time for a few questions, so please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, because we are recording this and we'll post it again. I think there are three overlapping and very difficult and complex issues. You mentioned a fourth with the firearms issues, Jennifer, but obviously a lot of violence stemming from organized crime directly against journalists, controlling the messages, so on. But it's not limited to that, obviously, and as Anna and others have pointed out, part of this equation, part of this scenario here also has to do with the impunity and the failure of government to do its job and fulfill its responsibilities. And then thirdly, as Azam has pointed out, the direct action by authorities threatening and trying to control the media in what is not only inappropriate, but in many cases illegal way. So I think that sort of is the broad scenario. Obviously the firearms issue is a big one as well that feeds this, but it's a bit of a discouraging and bleak story. And I think it's good that we have kind of tried to get a full view of it as well. Please, if you do have questions for our panelists, raise your hand, identify yourself. We'll take three, maybe these three right here, and then if you're short and to the point, maybe we'll get another round in. So Carlos, por favor.
Thank you. Carlos Ponce, Freedom House. Ana Cristina, you say that, of course, we agree that impunity is the main cause that is driving this nonsense killing of journalists there, and that no matter what, the protection mechanisms are not going to work. What do you think about the lack of prosecution as a factor here? And the second thing, the president said 2 to 3 weeks ago that Mexico needs to create a state-based mechanism to protect journalists. What do you think about that?
Okay, there was another question right here. Ma'am, please identify yourself.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Emma Grayev. I'm from Jalapa, Veracruz as well. And my question is for Azam. As a foreign journalist in Mexico, do you feel safer than national journalists in your work?
Yeah, and then you can pass it back to this.
I think I've got one.
She has one already. Thank you. If you would identify yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Madeline Penman. I'm a researcher on Mexico for Amnesty International. Gracias a todos, a todas. Es un evento muy doloroso. Entonces, muchas gracias. Anna, I have a question for you. You mentioned that there were 34 mil millones de pesos erogados por Peña Nieto en 4 años. ¿Para qué y sobre qué? O sea, can you tell us more about the public fund issues, specifically that 34 mil millones de pesos that you mentioned? And just a quick question about the protection mechanism. What can we do about many of the journalists that have been killed that have not been part of the protection mechanism because they have not trusted it? So are our calls about the protection mechanism misplaced because many of these journalists have decided from their own will not to be part of this protection mechanism?
Thank you very much. Ana, why don't you start? En español está muy perfectamente bien.
Okay. Sobre los mecanismos de protección y el combate a la impunidad, el problema es que el mecanismo de protección, en teoría, tendría que funcionar como una articulación entre las distintas autoridades de procuración de justicia, de seguridad interna, como la Secretaría de Gobernación, de Derechos Humanos, la Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos y la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores. No obstante, no existe esta coordinación dentro del propio mecanismo, ni tampoco dentro del nivel federal y del nivel local. Lo que genera esto es que las medidas sean específicamente para proteger integridad y no medidas preventivas o de prevención que generen un estado de seguridad para los periodistas. En ese sentido, desde que ha aumentado tanto las agresiones contra la prensa, hay más beneficiarios dentro del mecanismo, pero no han disminuido las agresiones porque no hay un combate a la impunidad. Y por eso ponía el caso de Cecilio Pineda y de Pedro Tamayo como ejemplo, porque al momento en el que se inserta un periodista como beneficiario del mecanismo, no se investiga la agresión inicial que después puede convertirse en algo tangible, como el asesinato de ambos, porque no hay una investigación y consecuencias para los perpetradores originales. Los mecanismos, la opción, y por eso decía yo que la opción no es generar más leyes, como ya decía Ahmed, de mecanismos locales o leyes de protección local, y desgraciadamente, dentro de las opciones que tiene que dijo el presidente las medidas y acciones que iba a presentar el presidente, no existe realmente un flujo que permita ver que efectivamente se va a concebir el sistema de protección como algo integral, que considere el combate a la impunidad como una medida de protección, como una medida de prevención. En ese sentido, mientras no haya, nosotros lo que decimos desde artículo 19 es que no se requieren hacer mecanismos locales, sino unidades de enlace o unidades de protección locales que puedan coordinarse efectivamente con el mecanismo federal. Se puede hacer un mecanismo nacional, ¿no? Eso es una de las cuestiones que estamos poniendo en la mesa con las distintas autoridades para que efectivamente haya una coordinación. Pero es un grave problema porque tampoco el apoyo psicosocial forma parte de las medidas de prevención y de protección, y que al final la muerte de un periodista es algo muy grave, pero lo que genera la muerte de un periodista en el entorno más cercano es gravísimo. ¿Por qué? Porque no solamente genera autocensura, sino genera paranoia, y la paranoia genera acciones de riesgo que pueden impactar de manera negativa en los periodistas que están alrededor. Eso mismo, voy a nada más pasar a la siguiente. La confianza, el problema es que si la mayoría de las agresiones vienen de las autoridades, de los funcionarios públicos, muchos de los periodistas que son agredidos no confían en las autoridades y por lo tanto no se acercan al mecanismo de protección. Si bien es cierto que para artículo 19 el formar parte del mecanismo de protección forma parte de una exigencia mucho mayor hacia el Estado para que proteja, para que efectivamente garantice la seguridad de los periodistas, en el último año han ocurrido ya un atentado contra un periodista en el estado de Veracruz, contra Armando Rodríguez, y un asesinato de una de las escoltas en Baja California. Y esto, sin duda, es algo grave. ¿Por qué? Porque lo que genera es más desconfianza y más miedo hacia el mecanismo. No obstante, sí es cierto que el mecanismo en medidas de protección ha mejorado su eficiencia, pero no así en el combate a la impunidad. Y bueno, creo yo que eso es importante decirlo para efectos de que no existen... Esa es la mayor falla del mecanismo. Sobre los 34,000 millones de pesos, tiene que ver con el ejercicio del dinero, el pago que el gobierno le hace a los medios de comunicación. En México, los medios de comunicación llegan a depender hasta en un 80% del dinero público. ¿Esto qué significa? Que las líneas editoriales de muchos de los medios están relacionadas con la narrativa oficial y, por lo tanto, los medios replican lo que el gobierno dice. De alguna manera, hay una frase que decía López Portillo hace más de 40 años, que decía: no te pago para que me pegues, y eso sigue muy vigente en los medios en México, y de alguna manera impacta de manera significativa no solamente en la criminalización hacia los periodistas, sino también en la forma en la eficiencia del Estado, porque si no hay una exigencia a través de los propios medios para mejorar y para rendir cuentas, pues entonces no se mejora. Esta es solamente la punta del iceberg y solo tiene que ver con el gobierno federal, los 34,000 millones de pesos. El monto asciende de manera significativa cuando sumamos los montos y las erogaciones estatales. Y esto creo que es importante ponerlo en referencia con el monto o el presupuesto que tiene la Fiscalía Especial de Atención a Delitos contra la Libertad de Expresión, que son 25 millones de pesos anuales. O sea, el 34,000 millones de pesos en 4 años, podemos dividirlos entre 4, más o menos 5,000 millones de pesos, algo así, 6,000 millones de pesos anuales. Pero en el caso de la Fiscalía Especial tiene solamente 25 millones de pesos. Es decir, el problema de las agresiones contra la prensa, a pesar de los pesares, a pesar de que lo sepamos, no es un problema que el Estado considere como un problema de Estado, a pesar de tener lo que considera como tal. Muchas gracias.
Azam, you're welcome to respond to any of these, but there was a question about how you felt in terms of your safety, and I guess that brings to mind another question I have. We tend to think about and talk about these threats and so on as being a local or state issue, which I think it is in many regards. But is it also an issue for national journalists and others, or is it really just a local concern?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Absolutely not. I do not face anywhere near the threat Mexican journalists face. It's a completely different scenario for them to threaten us compared to threatening Mexican journalists. I mean, I actually meant to say that in my comments, that the bravery and mettle it takes to be a journalist, a Mexican journalist in Mexico, covering the kinds of stories that some of them cover, is impressive. And and that's also why I think it's incumbent on us to do more as international journalists, because we have, I think, a broader license to write what we think, what we feel, what we've been able to report. We don't face either the financial or, honestly, the restrictions violence would otherwise put on journalists in Mexico. And your question was basically, is it a broader problem? than just
Yeah, the threats, can we say, you know, the threats and violence is really a local issue and it doesn't impact national journalists and others, or is that misguided? Is that a misperception of the problem? I'm interested in Anna and Jennifer's perceptions as well, but I'll just raise it with you.
Sure, I'll just quickly say, yeah, I think it does. I mean, as Anna was saying, certainly more of the violence is localized. Certainly more of the violence, I think the danger radiates from Mexico City in a much more profound way the farther away you get. The more out-of-state control the place is, the farther it is from the center of power. So it affects on a national level in two ways. Number one, national journalists, for whatever publication, still face the same kinds of threats. Not as grave, maybe not as severe, but the financial pressures and threats certainly exist. Beyond that, though, it's the message that Anna keeps referencing when you kill a journalist. What does it say about the freedom of expression? Well, self-censorship is a pretty profound problem, too, and understandably so. You see colleagues die, you see colleagues get fired, whether you're a national journalist, even if you're an international journalist, but of Mexican or based in Mexico or of Mexican origin. I think it has a really deleterious impact on the freedom of expression. I think it affects it much more profoundly than in just the direct way.
Do you want to add something, Anna?
Sí, para los periodistas como de un mayor impacto nacional, las agresiones son distintas. Son un poco más sofisticadas, desde el espionaje, que es una de las formas más usuales para periodistas, como ya lo hemos mencionado en el caso, por ejemplo, de Carmen Aristegui, de Carlos Loret de Mola, de diferentes periodistas que tienen un impacto a nivel nacional. Las amenazas en línea se convierten en la orden del día. Tenemos el caso de Héctor de Mauleón, que ha sido amenazado constantemente a través de las redes. Y el problema es que las amenazas a través de las redes también se pueden convertir en algo tangible en un país como México. Pero existe una nueva forma también de amenazar y de agredir, que es las demandas de daño moral, que también van en contra de estos periodistas de alto impacto, que al final impactan definitivamente en la precariedad y en el ámbito patrimonial de los periodistas, como el caso de Sergio Aguayo o de la propia Carmen Aristegui, o de algunos periodistas en el estado de Coahuila que han emitido información sobre las desapariciones en Coahuila.
Jennifer, do you want to add anything?
Not really much to this. I mean, I would say another thing that happens is that I think the foreign correspondents get sometimes more respect than the national correspondents from politicians. I remember an amazing story when Ginger Thompson was doing the profiles for the New York Times on, it was Calderón, López Obrador, and La Bastida. And she was going to interview López Obrador, and she called me from the taxi, and she said, you know, Jennifer, what would you ask López Obrador if you could? And I said, well, I know exactly what I would ask him. I said, ask him if he killed his brother. And of course he did. And of course to Ginger, he said yes. But to every other journalist in Mexico, he said, es mentiras, you know. But to the New York Times, he had to
Good.
Say what had happened.
All right, I have very limited time, but I will ask Rubén Barrera and Dolia Esteves, two Mexican journalists of great renown, if they will make very brief questions before we break. Dolia is frowning. She doesn't have a short question. But Dolia, do your best. Por favor, Dolia.
Lo voy a preguntar en español, Sam, tú hablaste de carencia de voluntad política en la resolución y también, Ana, de los asesinatos. Carencia de voluntad política en el Estado mexicano, en el gobierno de Enrique Peña Nieto en este caso, pero lo mismo ocurrió con el gobierno de Calderón. Yo me pregunto, ¿a qué se debe esa voluntad política? ¿Es realmente falta de voluntad política o estamos ante una situación en que está el Estado rebasado por el narcopoder o está en colusión con el narcopoder y que es finalmente lo que impide que se resuelva el problema de los asesinatos de los periodistas y de mucha gente?
Rubén?
Bueno, buenos días, mi nombre es Rubén Barrera, soy corresponsal de la agencia Notimex. Primero que nada, gracias al Wilson Center y a Wola por hacer este evento. Y la pregunta que se me antoja es una pregunta probablemente para la cual no hay respuesta, pero la voy a hacer. Es parte de nuestro trabajo. Y es, con todo lo que he escuchado, pareciera ser que estamos en una suerte de círculo vicioso. Lo que tú decías, Ana, la dependencia de los medios sobre la publicidad oficial, la impunidad. Y la pregunta que tengo es, digamos, ¿cuál sienten ustedes que va a ser el fondo de esta situación? O sea, ¿a qué nos exponemos los periodistas? Y hablo en plural a pesar de que tengo muchísimos años en Estados Unidos, pero bueno, mis raíces están allá, mis raíces profesionales. Y quizás, tomando un poco lo que Hassam decía y lo que también Jennifer decían, es que si dada esta situación, esta complicada situación, los periodistas en México, y sobre todo aquellos que ejercen un periodismo con mucha valentía, vamos a terminar dependiendo de los medios extranjeros, que parecen ser, que son los únicos cuya voz sí resuena y a los únicos que les hacen caso cuando una desgracia como la de Javier sucede.
Thank you. Let's start down here again. Ana, por favor. Or Azam, you want to go first? You go first.
I'll just answer Dolly's question really quickly. Listen, I've spent 2 years in Mexico, and that's not a lot of time to have analyzed the country, tried to understand it. But your question is a good one. What is this lack of political will? Is it really something more narco-associated? Is it a false state apparatus that people are contending with? From what I've seen, what I believe, certainly the cartel landscape has impeded Mexico's progress, has, hurt its democracy. But Mexico is not a failed state. You go around Mexico City, you go to different parts of it, it's a wealthy country. It's not a country with its hat in its hand asking for money from world powers. It's an OECD nation. It's a G20 nation. So the idea that somehow the cartel landscape has stopped the state from functioning, or that is what inhibits the state from investigating a journalist's murder, or from pursuing the things that I think everyone agrees need to be pursued, first and foremost, targeting impunity. I don't buy that. I think it's too easy to say the state has been destabilized and debilitated to the point where it cannot conduct state functions because of the narcos. I think it certainly has an impact. But again, Mexico is a wealthy nation with incredibly talented and able people. Their diplomatic corps, their political corps, a lot of these people have studied at the best universities in the world. They're not suffering for lack of talent or money. That's why I believe it's political will. I used to work in Afghanistan. I used to write a lot about the rule of law there and how it was inhibiting that country's development. And then I came to Mexico, and it really surprised me because I saw the same sort of lack of political will, the same sort of deleterious effect that the misapplication of the law was having. Only Mexico didn't have the excuse. I didn't think. I felt like it had both the capacity and the resources to do better, and I think that's one of the reasons why my particular line of reporting on Mexico has focused on that, because I think Mexicans deserve better, and the state could do better. So I don't disagree that narco-trafficking has a major impact on the state of the state, so to speak, but I don't think that's a sufficient answer for why more is not done.
Great. Ana or Jennifer? Any last comments? Or?
Bueno, solamente respecto a lo que has mencionado, yo creo que hay una buena parte de esta historia. Y es que tras la muerte de Javier Valdéz, un grupo de periodistas, más de 380 periodistas, se sentaron a discutir por primera vez en la historia de México una agenda de periodistas y empezaron a discutir qué era lo que querían para ejercer su trabajo libremente. Vamos a ver si esa agenda tiene efectos positivos o un seguimiento puntual. Pero creo que por primera vez los periodistas dijeron por qué la sociedad no se está preocupando porque nos están matando. ¿Por qué la sociedad no sale a protestar cuando matan a un periodista? Porque la primera pregunta que dijo Eric, ¿por qué es diferente un periodista sobre otro ciudadano? ¿Y por qué la sociedad no se da cuenta de que al final cuando nos matan están matando parte también de sus derechos a estar informados? Creo que eso es un punto de quiebre y es un punto de no retorno. Sin embargo, como dice también Assam, la voluntad política es la palabra mágica en México. Nosotros creemos que mientras no haya un reconocimiento real del problema y una política de Estado para combatir el problema, una política de Estado me refiero a todas las instituciones de gobierno, desde todos los niveles y de todos los poderes, no va a haber una reducción de las agresiones contra la prensa. O sea, no va a haber posibilidad de que esto se cambie. Porque, para empezar, en todos los países de América Latina, el reconocimiento ha permitido también generar acciones contra la impunidad, la verdad, reconocer la verdad y la justicia. Aquí no hay un proceso de verdad. Las verdades se tapan y por eso se matan a los periodistas. O sea, el control de la información en México es el motivo por el que pasa todas estas cosas. Entonces, la forma en la que esto se va a revertir es justo, que creo yo que es de largo alcance, pero creo que también los periodistas han formado una especie de resistencia que ha permitido que diversas fuentes de información salgan. Antes era imposible saber sobre el caso, por ejemplo, de las empresas de Duarte. Esos niveles de corrupción era algo que no pasaba. Y sin embargo, ahorita el periodismo está haciendo el trabajo de la persecución de justicia. Y eso es algo que no se veía antes. O si se veía, automáticamente los atacaban y acallaban esas voces, como mencionó ahorita Jessica en el caso de Lerio Juárez. O sea, pasaba algo que automáticamente, el caso, ahorita va a platicar Adela, Tijuana decían algo y entonces era automáticamente una amenaza. Entonces esas cosas están cambiando porque también las redes de periodistas están generando solidaridad y están generando protección. Ahora si le pasa algo al Z, si le pasa algo a RíoDoce, si les pasa algo en Veracruz, los periodistas salen a decir algo. Y eso es algo que es diferente a cómo funcionaba antes. Y yo creo que tenemos que trasladarnos hacia un espacio en el que un impacto como el que se tuvo en el caso del reportaje del New York Times pueda tenerlo también un periódico local. Porque sí, efectivamente, el gobierno ha respondido como ha respondido y ha generado todas estas conferencias de prensa porque venía desde fuera y porque sabe que el mundo lo está observando y a México no le gusta que desde fuera le digan qué hacer o cómo está. México siempre ha sido un país que en el extranjero ha tenido una muy buena cara, una cara de solidaridad, una cara de cooperación. Mientras están matando periodistas, somos uno de los países que más estamos aceptando refugiados, por ejemplo. Entonces, esta situación es algo que es muy ambivalente y hace genera una situación difícil. Pero yo no creo que esto vaya a tener un punto final pronto. Creo que necesitamos primero el reconocimiento para que después haya un proceso de reivindicación, pero definitivamente creo que los periodistas ahorita están generando un mecanismo de resistencia que además se está uniendo con el movimiento de derechos humanos y antes eso no sucedía.
Great. Jennifer, you have a last comment, parting thought?
I mean, I don't have really an answer to Dolly's question, but my sense is that the federal government is unable to control the state governments, that the state governments are in many cases under threat or in collusion with the cartels, which are not just drug cartels anymore. They're mafias that are dealing in extortion and human trafficking and all kinds of different kinds of crime, kidnapping. So that sort of is my sense, that there's a loss of control, whether it's become a narco state, perhaps, but certainly there's a feeling of loss of control. And just as there's nobody in jail for having killed a journalist, there's also no politician in jail. And goodness knows there are many, many Mexican politicians who should be in jail. I mean, that's another message that needs to be underscored.
Great. Well, I want to thank each of you for your participation today and the role you play at your institutions, your newspaper in the case of Azam, for keeping a focus on this issue and writing about it and thinking about it and helping us understand it. So thank you all for that. Before we transition to the next panel, and I want to encourage you not to do the Washington thing and leave after the first panel. Stick around. The stars are yet to come. But before we do that, Maureen Meyer and I wanted to take just a brief moment to recognize all the journalists who have been so important in Mexico and the United States for their advocacy and their role in not only chronicling what's happening in Mexico, but also denouncing the violence against them. I want to just pick on three, and Maureen's going to, why don't you come on up? Maureen mentioned a few others, but I just wanted to recognize three in particular. Carlos Lauria, who many of you know is CPJ's, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Senior Program Coordinator for the Americas, and he's been a fearless champion of independent journalism throughout the region and in Mexico. He has been in his position for 15 years. He was going to be here today, but his father passed away, and so he's in Buenos Aires, possibly listening in online, but we want to recognize him. He's about to leave his position and join OSF's independent journalism project in Europe. So I just wanted to recognize Carlos and all his work on behalf of journalists in the region. I also wanted to recognize posthumously Michael O'Connor. Mike O'Connor, many of you knew Mike. He was a well-regarded journalist. Well-regarded journalist who worked for CBS News, National Public Radio, and the New York Times, but also was a real tireless and strong advocate for journalists in Mexico and worked with CPJ since 2009. Mike, as you may know, died unexpectedly in 2014. We are accompanied by his wife, Tracy Wilkinson, longtime bureau chief of the LA Times in Mexico City. Now we're privileged to have her here in Washington, work for LA Times. Tracy, we think of Mike often. Thank you for your work and for his work as well. Thank you. And then I would be remiss not to mention one other person who has just been a stalwart on these issues for many years, and that has to be Dolia Esteves.
Yes.
Not only is she the dean of Mexican journalists here in Washington, she may not be happy that I said that, but not only has she been the longest-serving journalist here in Washington, probably knows Washington better than most Americans, to be honest with you, but has also been a tireless advocate for journalists in Mexico and freedom of speech and the press. And she's partnered with us at the Wilson Center. She wrote a chapter in my very first book here at the Wilson Center in 2010. Her chapter was called Protecting Press Freedom in an Environment of Violence and Impunity, and that was 2010. I suspect we could just change the date and it would all be about the same. So it's troubling, but we are delighted to partner with Dolia and her support and her work. So just a special recognition to her. Thank you all. Maureen wanted to just mention a few folks as well.
No small task, so thank you, Eric. Actually, I could not think of names without making a very long list of individuals, so I was wanting to more recognize the efforts being undertaken by overall Mexican journalists and civil society, highlighting the urgency of this issue. We have representatives both of organizations and journalists here, but did want to highlight, for example, the creation of Periodistas de a Pie in 2007, which was really based on wanting journalists themselves to organize to both help professionalize and improve the quality of journalism, but also working on self-care issues and protection. In particular, Marcela Turati, who is one of the founders of Periodistas a Pie, also was recognized by WOLA in 2013 with our Human Rights Award, both for her reporting, but also elevating the plight of journalists in Mexico. Daniela Pastrana, who's the current director of Periodistas a Pie, just as a broad, there's many other founders that I cannot list here today, but recognizing them as an emerging organization. I think the human rights and communications organizations, including Article 19, that have now formed part of the Frente por la Libertad de Expresión y Protesta Social en Mexico, which is a very recent, but looking more at freedom of expression and legal issues in Mexico. CENCOS, the Centro Nacional de Comunicación Social, which was actually established in 1965. And I had to look that up. That has been working for many, obviously, decades, strengthening freedom of expression in Mexico, human rights, but also working to better promote communications tools for vulnerable groups in Mexico. The current and past journalists who have actually decided to work within the mechanism for protection of journalists and human rights defenders, there is a council, a consultative council that several journalists spend time on pro bono, working to figure out how to better protect their colleagues and determine protection mechanism. They're recognizing those efforts in that time. And just lastly, what Ana hinted to, which is the organizations and media outlets that have come together recently with the Agenda de Periodistas in terms of what's next. And I think certainly, how do you address the urgent measures to be taken to protect journalists in Mexico? And so I think recognizing there's lots of important international organizations working on this issue, but certainly wanted to highlight a lot of the efforts in Mexico itself, in the country, to really work on protection issues. So.
Great, thank you. Join me in thanking our panelists, recognizing all these journalists that have done terrific work. I am going to call this not a break, but a transition, just to try to keep it under control. So if you wouldn't mind standing, not leaving the room if possible, we're going to invite nuestros amigos y colegas de Mexico que vengan a la mesa, and we'll start up as soon as we possibly can, maybe 5 minutes. Thank you all. Thank you. Hey.
Cold up here. I'm freezing.
Oh, yeah, it's super cold.
It's always chilly here. Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Ana.
Muchas gracias.